You didn't ask for this. You didn't pray for it. You didn't do anything special. It just started one Tuesday morning. It was standing across the street, between a coffee shop and a pharmacy. Nobody stopped. Nobody looked. Nobody saw it. And then it turned its head, slowly, and looked directly at me. I dropped my coffee. I stood there for 11 seconds. I counted. And then I ran. But running didn't help, because when I reached my apartment building, it was already there, standing at my door. Level 1. I didn't go inside. I sat on the stairs outside my building for 2 hours, shaking. At some point, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Sleep deprivation, stress, it made sense. I walked inside. It wasn't there. The room was empty, normal, and I almost laughed at myself. I made tea. I sat down. I exhaled for what felt like the first time all day. And then the light in the corner moved. I turned around very slowly, and it was standing in my living room, right next to my bookshelf, looking at me. I screamed. My neighbor banged on the wall and told me to shut up. The angel didn't react. It just watched. It didn't speak. It didn't move. It didn't threaten. It just existed in my space like it had every right to be there. I grabbed my phone. I filmed it, shaking hands, bad angle, everything. And when I watched the video back, there was nothing there. That was the moment I understood. Nobody else could see it. Not cameras, not people, only me. It disappeared at 3:17 a.m. I watched the clock. 1 second it was there. The next, the room was empty and I could breathe again. I didn't sleep. I sat at my window and watched the street below. And I started counting. 3. There were 3 of them standing on my block alone. And none of them were looking at each other. They were all looking up at me. They were all looking at me. And then they raised their hands. All 3. At the same time. I stepped back from the window. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. What did they want? Why me? I spent the next day pretending it hadn't happened. I went to work. I smiled at people. I made small talk. I was very good at lying. But it was there, at the office, and then one at the subway, and one at the grocery store. They were everywhere. I just hadn't been paying attention. And then one of them did something no angel had done before. It moved toward me. On purpose, directly. Level 2. Nobody moved out of its way because they couldn't see it. It walked through the crowd like the crowd wasn't there. It stopped in front of me, close enough that I could feel the warmth of its light on my skin. And it leaned down. It didn't speak with words. It pressed one finger, if you could call it that, to my forehead. And everything went white. I saw things. Not visions, memories, but not mine. Something older. Something that had been happening long before I was born. They've always been here, always watching. And for thousands of years, nobody could see them. Until me. Someone helped me up, asked if I was okay. I said yes. I said I tripped. And then I asked them, "Do you see anything unusual on this street?" She looked around. She said, "No, why? What do you see?" And I realized I had no answer that wouldn't destroy my life. I said nothing. I went home. I sat on my kitchen floor and I started writing everything down. In 3 days, I had documented 41 separate angel sightings. Different shapes, different sizes, different behaviors. They weren't all the same. Some of them seemed peaceful, observational, like researchers. But some of them felt like something else entirely. And then I started noticing something terrifying. The angels were noticing that I noticed them. I started changing my routes, my patterns, like I was trying to lose a tail, like I was being followed. Because I was. I stopped sleeping in my bedroom. The angel that stood in my apartment started coming back, every night at exactly 11 p.m. One night I worked up the courage to speak to it. I stood in the doorway and I said, "What do you want from me?" It didn't answer. It slowly raised one arm and pointed directly at the wall behind me. And on the wall there was a shadow. But it wasn't my shadow. There was something else in the room. Something the angel was pointing at. Something I couldn't see. And the angel, for the first time, looked afraid. Level 3. The next morning, the angel that had always just watched left something on my kitchen counter. Something physical. I picked it up. The moment I touched it, I heard something. Not a sound, something inside my head. A single word, in a language I had never learned. But I understood it perfectly. The word was run. I didn't run. I sat down and tried to think logically. Who was I supposed to be running from? The angels? Or something they were hiding from? That night the shadow came back. But this time without the angel. Just the shadow. In my kitchen, moving on its own. I held up the stone. And the shadow stopped moving. Like it saw the stone. Like the stone meant something. Then the angel came back. Faster than I'd ever seen one move. It came through the wall. Physically through the wall. The shadow screamed, not a sound you hear with your ears, a sound you hear in your chest, like something tearing, and then it was gone. The shadow vanished. The angel turned to me, and it looked exhausted. For the first time, it looked like something that could be tired. I did something insane. I pulled out a chair, and I said, "Do you want to sit down?" And I swear, it almost looked like it wanted to smile. It didn't sit, but it stayed. And for the first time, it felt less like a surveillance and more like a protection. But then the warning started. Things the angel couldn't directly tell me. It started showing me instead. On the page, rearranged from my own words, it said, "The ones that come in shadow are not like us. They use humans. They need something from you specifically. Something needed something from me specifically. Not just anyone who could see angels. Me, by name, by face, by some reason I didn't understand yet." I asked the angel, "How long?" It pointed at the clock on the wall. 11:00 p.m. It pointed at the window, then held up 3 fingers. 3 hours. I had 3 hours before something I couldn't see, couldn't photograph, and couldn't explain would come for me. What do you do with that? I grabbed my notebook, my phone, the stone, and I went to the one place I thought might matter. The place where the first one appeared, the coffee shop across from the pharmacy. Level 4. I stood in that spot for a long time, and then the city changed around me. All at once, like someone had adjusted the frequency. There was a hierarchy. I could see it now. The ones that simply watched, the ones that moved. And above them, something else. Something that hadn't looked at me yet. The smaller angels noticed me seeing the hierarchy, and several of them began moving away, retreating, like they weren't supposed to let me see this much. One of them stopped retreating. It turned back, and it walked toward me with urgency. The way someone walks when they're breaking a rule. It grabbed my wrist, and I felt it, physical contact, real and solid, like being gripped by something made of warm marble. And it pulled me into an alley, and the alley wasn't an alley anymore. It was a place between places, and there were hundreds of them there, all of them in conversation, all of them stopping when they saw me. The one who brought me raised its arm, like it was presenting me, and the silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever experienced. And then one stepped forward, larger than the others, older somehow. The light it emitted wasn't gold, it was something older than color. It communicated differently, not through touch. It simply looked at me, and the information arrived, like opening a file I already had, but had never been able to access. I learned that what I could do, the seeing, wasn't a gift. It wasn't random. It was engineered. Someone had done this to me, deliberately. Something had modified me before I could even speak. Given me this sight, not as a blessing and as a tool. They needed a human who could see both sides. Both sides needed a translator, someone who could see the shadows and the light. And someone, a very long time ago, had volunteered me for that role, without asking. And then one of them told me something I hadn't thought to ask. Something that changed everything again. There had been others before me. Other humans who could see, other translators. Every single one of them had disappeared, not taken by the shadows, taken by something that didn't want the two sides communicating at all, something that wanted to keep them permanently separate. I ran back to the alley exit, back to the city. The angel let me go, and when I came out the other side, it was 11:02 p.m. The shadows were already there. Final level. There were 7 of them. 7 shadow shapes on 7 different surfaces, not moving randomly, moving together, like a coordinated search pattern. The stone was getting hotter and brighter, and I realized the stone wasn't for protection. It was a beacon. It was calling something. From above, a sound, but not the chest tear of the shadows. Something older, something that shook the pavement under my feet. The shadows saw it coming before I did. They started retreating, fast, all 7, dissolving back into the walls like they'd never existed. It landed, if landing is the right word. It arrived, between the buildings, and the world held its breath. It looked at me for a long time, and then it spoke, not to my mind, out loud, in human words, in my voice. It said, "You weren't supposed to see us." No human was. The modification made to you was unauthorized. It broke a rule that cannot be unmade, and now we have a problem. Unauthorized. Someone had done this without permission. Someone had broken the rules of both worlds, and they had used a child, me, to do it. I asked the only question that mattered. Who did it? Who modified me? The elder entity went silent for a very long time, and then it said one name, a name I recognized, a name I knew. It was my father's name. My father died when I was 6. I barely remembered his face, but he had done this. He had touched both worlds, and he had given me sight to finish something he started. The shadows weren't after me because I could see. They were after me because I was his son, and his son was never supposed to live long enough to understand what he'd started. What did he start? I asked. The elder entity looked at me for a long moment, and then it said, a treaty between our kind and theirs, and you, only you, can complete it. I didn't know how to complete a treaty between celestial forces. I was just someone who drank too much coffee and couldn't sleep. But I held up the stone, and I walked toward the shadows. One of the shadows stepped forward, onto the pavement, physical, real, and for the first time, I could actually see it, not just its shadow, its actual form. It spoke, out loud, not in my voice, in silence, but a silence with weight, with texture, with meaning. And the meaning was, we never wanted this either. My father had seen this too. He'd reached this same moment, and then he'd been killed before he could take the next step. I took the next step. When both of us touched the stone at the same time, the city exploded in light. Both kinds of light, all at once. I don't know what the treaty says. I don't know what was agreed. But something fundamental shifted, and both sides felt it, and the shadows never came back. I can still see them. I always will. But now when they look at me, they nod, like I'm one of them, like I always was. My father spent his whole life building a bridge between two worlds that didn't know they needed one. He never got to see it finished. I finished it, and I still don't know if that makes me lucky or the most targeted person alive. Because here's the thing, nobody tells you about being the only one who can see something. Once both sides know you exist, you can never be invisible again.